So now that you understand some of the various C# project types that we can create in Visual Studio, let's get started in learning how to write C# code. So we're going to get started with this concept of a variable, right? A variable is a named location in memory. And this named location allows us to store pieces of information. And we may be getting this information from the user, like they've typed in some values into our console window, or they typed it into a text box, or they typed it into a web form. We could be getting this information from a database. We could be getting it from a file that we've read in, right? This information can come from anywhere. But a variable allows us to give that piece of information a name so that we can reference it when we're using it in various operations. So, for example, over in memory, in our computer, in our RAM, right, we have all of these various units of storage. And they're all given very unhelpful names, which is based on memory addressing rules. And they're very hard to remember. And so instead of having to remember, something like 00F is the number 2, maybe I give it a name that actually describes what it is. So maybe I have a variable named num of people. And I can link that name num of people to that value that I'm storing in memory. So anytime I want to reference the number of people that I'm using in my formula or my program, I can use my named variable and it will access that area of memory. Now, variables can be used not only to store information, but to change that information. So if I have, let's say, an address for my customer, and I'm linking that address to one of these memory locations, and let's say inside of here, I've got 101 East Street as their address. But then the customer tells me through my form, my address has changed. And so my new address is 202 East Street. Well, then I can write code that takes address, the variable, and changes that in memory to 202 East Street. And now every time I reference my address, it points to the correct information. So that's just an introduction to variables. And variables are something that we'll use in every part of our application. And so I just want you to understand what it is that we're talking about when we use variables. Now, the second thing that we have to understand when we're using variables is something called a data type. Right? And C# is a typed language. And that means that each one of our variables is going to be defined as a particular data type. And the data type is the definition of the type of item that we're holding. So I'm just going to put type of item in memory. Right? So a data type defines the particular item, and it imposes some rules on the item that we're holding in memory. And so a data type can be like an integer. Integers being whole numbers, no decimal places, no precision, or we could have decimals, right? So an integer might be 5, whereas a decimal is 5.5. And so you'll learn about some various data types, and we'll talk about it in our next video, what some of those rules are for different data types. But this has been a basic understanding of variables.